Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 512.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because here's what I know that you actually already know, but you just may not have thought about. When it comes down to building your business, growing your enterprise, letting the world know that you exist, you probably have some challenges getting the word out. I mean, most of us as entrepreneurs, we're so busy focused on our systems and making sure the widget is awesome, making sure the service actually hits on all the points and pieces that occasionally we have challenge letting the world know the difference that we're making. And let's be clear, whether you're for-profit, non-profit, wish you had profit, it doesn't matter. You want the world to know you exist. So in some way, shape, or form, you run up against that thing known as public relations, PR. How did they get on the news? And how come people aren't talking about me? And what's interesting is that technology is even changing that game and how that is done. Because you could say, well, I don't know all the people, and that's the excuse. That's what it is. I don't have all the right relationships. And to a point, that could be true. But I have with me someone today who would venture to say that there's probably more you could be doing, should be doing, and most importantly, has a service that is out there that will help you to do it. I'm, of course, talking about Greg Galant. Now, many of you may know him from the Shorty Awards, or you may know his new venture, Muck, which is out there helping individuals like you, like I, go out there and be smarter with powerful PR and easy-to-use software. Now, some of you, you've been waiting for this. Others of you, you're like, well, I'm still working on the beginning of my business, and I totally understand, but here's what I'm going to say to you. You will still learn because when it comes to building your cash flow, Greg has done it multiple times. So let's get ready to listen, let's get ready to learn, and let's get ready to love Greg Galant. Greg, how you doing?
Great. Good to be here, Jay.
Glad you are taking the time. Thanks for joining us. So now, this being your first time here, I have to ask you the same question I tend to ask everybody else. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. You know, Spider-Man, Batman, Wonder Woman, Robin, etc. And I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. For example, as an entrepreneur, I can envision myself using our products and services, flying around town, saving customers one sale at a time. And yes, I am probably wearing a cape and tights at that particular moment. Also, though, like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. So if you take Spider-Man, for example, there was a time where he was just a kid going to school, doing his thing, taking some photos. Then one day he gets bit by a spider, discovers, oh my goodness, I have a special ability, and he gets to choose whether to use it for good or for evil. So my question to you is as follows. Before Muck, before the Shorty Awards, before being able to work with companies like Comcast, Pfizer, Chobani, Nike, etc., before all the things that we know you for today, Greg, what we want to know is, who is Greg Galant?
Well, I've been kind of a lifelong entrepreneur. So I got started as a bored suburban, actually junior high school student, where kind of got on the internet really early, originally through dial-up using Prodigy, if you remember that service, an ill-fated competitor to AOL. And they gave everybody free web space. So I spent probably a full day or two learning how to code a website. And then I decided to start offering my services to build websites for companies. And I built a business throughout junior high school and high school, where I ended up building the website for a local chain of newspapers, a French philosopher, a clinical trials company, and kept that business up through high school and college. And that was my first venture, and kind of led me into all the trouble I've gotten into since.
Yeah, media and trouble. That those two things never go together. Never. And for those of you wondering, dial-up was this thing before you just turned on your phone and the internet was already there. And yes, I had never thought there would be a day where mentioning and remembering Prodigy would be like dating myself, but yeah, I remember that too. So that's pretty interesting. Now, take us on this journey, if you will. How do we go from junior high teaching yourself to code to Muck Rack? I mean, there's got to be a couple of steps in between there.
Yeah, so actually what happened was, as I was keeping my business in college, I'd also had the opportunity to spend a summer working at a venture capital firm. And then as I was finishing up my senior year, I worked at CNN.com as an associate producer. And I was stuck in Atlanta traffic getting to CNN.com. And I hated Atlanta radio. I didn't like my options for what to listen to in traffic. This was in 2005. So it was actually just when the iPod came out. And this might sound familiar to you, but I was thinking, wouldn't it be awesome if we could let people just download MP3s of spoken word content to listen to on their commute? So I looked into it and I saw that there was this idea that you could have RSS feeds with enclosures, and some people are calling it podcasts. So I decided in 2005, like, let me try launching a podcast and see what happens. So I started what was probably the first podcast about entrepreneurship, called Venture Voice. And I had anyone on it from Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, back when LinkedIn was 30 people. I had the founder of Yelp on there when Yelp was just getting going, the founder of the Vanguard Group, Brooklyn Brewery, all these other great entrepreneurs, because I knew, having been an entrepreneur, how lonely it can be and how hungry for information people get. And then actually one of my guests on my podcast, this was back in, it's probably 2005 or 2006, was this entrepreneur by the name of Evan Williams. And he was working on a really hot pre-launch company called Odeo. And if you don't remember it, there's a good reason. They launched Odeo. It itself was supposed to be a podcasting platform, and it ended up being a failure. But I'd stayed in touch with Ev a bit because we were both in the podcasting world. And Ev very cleverly pivoted to a little side project they had called Twitter. So I signed up to Twitter super early because I was in this early podcasting scene and was following Ev. I got my first name on Twitter, so I'm just at Gregory on Twitter, simply because I was the first Gregory to sign up and go for getting the first name.
Wow.
And I must admit, at first, I was a little skeptical about Twitter, but I saw that there was great content happening on there, and that you could find, really interested to kind of find people by topic. So then had the idea, along with my co-founder, Lee Semmel, to launch a word show honoring the best of, at first with Twitter, and then, with the idea that we'd expand out to other forms of social media. And we didn't know if it'd really be something, but in 2 weekends, we had this idea that we could build a platform that let people vote with the tweet. And now that's commonplace, but no one had ever done it before. Mm-hmm. So we launched and we figured, how do we get people to vote with a tweet? We'll call it an award show. So $8 later on GoDaddy, we had ShortyAwards.com. And then we built the website in 2 weekends, launched it. And within 24 hours, Shorty Awards became the top trending term on Twitter, because this idea of voting with the social share was so viral and was so powerful, and no one had done it before. So it was really new to everybody, and people are really intrigued by this idea.
Well, yeah. I mean, It's funny to hear about these things post. I mean, for some, maybe they've recently seen there's a new special that's been going around called Valley of the Boom, where it literally talks about the creation of the internet and how it all came together and whatnot. And hearing these things post, it sounds like, today I'm sure people are like, how did you have this idea? How did you know it would work? And what on earth possessed you to think that something like this would actually happen? And I know, here's my question. How is an award show actually a business?
Oh, great question. So first of all, I didn't know that it would work. And of all the ideas that I've had, I always thought the Shorty Awards was going to be a lot of fun, but I thought it had the least potential as a business. And sure enough, it ended up being one of my best ideas. But, my philosophy when launching businesses is if the business is going to take a lot of capital and resources to start up, like you want to open up a grocery store, you better do your research and a big financial plan and all that, because it's going to be millions in overheads. And if it goes wrong, you're going to be stuck with the lease and all that. But if it's a business idea you can try out quickly and cheaply, then don't think about it too much. And that was my thought with the Shorty Awards. I knew hey, we could build it in 2 weekends. We'll put it out there. And if it has resonance, if people love it, then we'll have to double down and we'll figure out how to make it work as a business, which we had no idea when we launched it. And then on the flip side, if we put it out there and end up being a big failure, it was just 2 weekends worth of work. So who cares? We just move on and try another thing. And we've tried lots of things over the years. So that was the philosophy behind it. In fact, I found in my career, the longer I've spent thinking about an idea before I launch it, the worse it does. So there's something to be said for spontaneity.
You just totally irritated half the people who have been getting ready to get ready for a long, long time. They're like, what? That's not fair. But let's talk about it, for example. How much did you learn in the process of the Shorty Awards, building it, making it? How much was it's what I like to call the feedback loop. How valuable was that to get something out there and start to see how the public was going to respond to it?
Oh, it was tremendous, because we had no idea which kind of communities within Twitter would be interested. And we've since expanded it to all forms of social media. But in those early days, we had no idea about that. We didn't know how to put on a word show. We didn't know if people would want to sponsor it. We didn't know what the business model would be. But by getting it out there, it gave us license to call on all that. And then actually, interestingly enough, that's what led to Muck, because that first year, and just to back up, I've launched a bunch of different things in my career. And I know usually when you launch something, nobody cares and you got to pound your head against the wall for years before people start caring and you get legitimacy and press. Mm-hmm. The Shorty Awards was the opposite. We saw within 24 hours, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, BBC all contacted us to cover the event and write about it. And in fact, I still remember our office at the time was in Brooklyn. And the Wall Street Journal reporter was like, I'm going to come to Brooklyn. I want to take you out to lunch and learn about this. And back then, this was 10 years ago, nobody wanted to come to Brooklyn. It wasn't cool to have an office there yet. So I was like, what's going on here that the press really cares about this thing? And then I got this early insight from doing the Shorties that journalists were using social media, particularly Twitter, but all social media, to figure out what to write about, what to cover, and share their news. Mm. And then it was that insight I got from running the Shorty Awards that early on, that first year, that led to the idea for Muck.
Got it. Now, quickly, before we get to Muck, because I want to have that conversation, but I also want other people to understand how this idea, how did you figure out what the business model is when it was a 2-weekend project and you're like, this is now a thing? What is the business model behind an award show?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's changed over time. So the first business model we went out with was getting sponsors. So that first year, I was just calling everybody I knew, and we ended up getting Pepsi and the Knight Foundation to sponsor it.
Wow.
And then we also sold tickets, but the ticket sales ends up being like 10% of the revenue. So it's really, those first couple of years, it was all about sponsorship.
Mm.
And then what we found out was actually sponsorship is a really tough business model to have as your primary business model. It's great when you get it, but it comes down to a couple big companies writing you a check, and you never know, like, is that company going to come back the next year? A lot of times, like, you might do an awesome sponsorship and that company changes CMOs or they change their agency and they're like, okay, we're going to, just change everything that we're doing, or, your decision maker there gets fired. So it's very stressful those first couple of years because we never knew would the sponsor, even if we had a great relationship with them, like, would they be there in a year to sponsor it again? So instead, what we saw, and I should just back up, the way the awards work is people get nominated, they get voted up by the public. These are influencers and celebrities, and they could win. And the people who are the winners don't, pay us a dime all along the way. These influencers and celebrities out there, social media personalities, etc. Then in the third year, what we saw was that there was this whole business building up around social media where brands and agencies were really focusing on doing social media and just more generally digital work. And we saw that within the world of these brands and agencies, they're used to paying entry fees for entering award shows, similar to how you pay an entry fee to apply to a college. And there are awards that have been around for decades, like the Clio Awards and the Cannes Lions, where anytime you want to enter work, you pay a few $100 for your entry fee. That lets you enter it to get it judged by a jury of your peers. And then, it doesn't guarantee a win. You could enter and still not win anything, but that's how the process works. So what we decided that third year was that we'd keep it free for, like it always had been, for the celebrities and the influencers, because they're individuals. They don't necessarily have a budget. And, we wanted everyone to get a fair shake, even if they didn't have any money. But then for the brands and agencies, we figured we'd just use that same business model that the Cannes Lion or the Clios or pretty much any award show has. Since their company's entering, they all have budgets set aside to enter awards. So it's not like, discriminatory in the sense that anyone can't enter. All these big brands have the budget for it. And so we launched that, and it took a couple of years to grow, but now actually those entry fees are the primary source of revenue for us. And it's been really powerful because it's thousands of companies paying us a little bit of money. So we're not kind of beholden to any one company. And then we can also count on that cash flow so we could build a staff to run the awards.
Awesome.
But, again, funny enough, I didn't even know that business model existed when we launched the Shorty Awards.
Well, and that's what I like about stories like this. And when talking to the entrepreneurs is that every person who goes out there to build a business, it's really important that we don't get locked into it, being a particular certain way or having a certain vision, because we might end up saying, we're saying no because we have this vision, but that precludes us from saying yes to something that is ultimately better than what we thought or originally had in mind in the first place. But what I would love for you to speak on before we switch and transition into Muck Rack is talk to us about the uncertainty, because there was this time period that you state where there was just, uncertainty, but you kept pushing forward. And I know that a lot of individuals, maybe they dislike their job or they want more stability in their cash flow, but there was this uncertainty about where that next sponsorship was going to come from, or is this idea going to work, and how do we pivot to make that happen? All right, everybody, thanks for listening, and I'm glad that you are enjoying what you are hearing thus far. But here's one of the things that's really important. One of the most important things that you can do is get started. One of the things that I've said before, and I say again, once you get started, stay started. But more importantly, there can be lots of roadblocks to getting started. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove one of those roadblocks for you and make it a little bit easier. Because the thing that I don't want to stop you is thinking, do I need a local number? How about a long distance number? Or should it be 800? How on earth am I going to make that happen so that people can contact me as I'm out there building my business, making my cash flow grow, but most importantly, understanding that it doesn't have to be difficult. Many of you may know, but if you don't, there's a company out there by the name of Grasshopper. And what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygrasshopper.com/cashflow diary. Grasshopper is the entrepreneur's phone system. It works like a traditional phone system, but requires no hardware to purchase, no software to install. It's just a number that flat works. So if you are out there building that distributed workforce across many different locations, it's a way for you to still go out there and make your number be unified, simple, easy to use, something we've been using for quite some time. So again, go over to trygrasshopper.com/cashflow diary. Now, let's get back to the rest of the story.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, there's a great quote from Warren Buffett, which is, if you want a reputation as a good business person, be sure to get into a good business. And what I take away from that is that, you have to think a lot about does your business have a good revenue model? In addition, just thinking about, are you executing as well as you can? And so one thing that I really think about heavily with making a good business, and I think about this across both the Shorty Awards and Muck is, for one, like the revenue diversity that you have. So in other words, avoiding concentration, different people have different guidelines, but essentially, like, you want to avoid having 10% of your revenue coming from any one customer, or, in an ideal world, even 5% of your revenue coming from any one customer. Because guess what? Any one customer, no matter how good a job you do for them, can leave you. And it might be because they go out of business. Look at Sears, which just,
Right.
they could have been your number one client. You could have killed it for them. They're going bankrupt, you're losing them, and now, you'd have to make up a huge chunk of your revenue if you were counting on them. So a big part of it is seeing like, hey, how do we get more revenue diversity? How do we get many more people paying us maybe even a smaller amount of money so that we don't have to worry about any one customer leaving us and jeopardizing the whole business?
Well, and I think, oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I was just kind of realizing that. And then also, realizing that it can take a while to get there. So that was only the third year that we even introduced the entry part of it, with brands and agencies entering their best work. And then it took a couple of years after that before it grew to be able to become the dominant business model over the sponsorships. So, sometimes you have to play this game like we were. Where we're like, hey, we know selling sponsorships to an award show is a nice auxiliary business model. It's not a great primary revenue model. Yet here we are. We've got to keep it our primary revenue model to keep the lights on, while thinking about the future and while thinking about how we diversify our revenue streams.
And I think this conversation is really, really relevant for a lot of individuals who are beginning to create content and or provide, some sort of value in a digital space on a social media platform, who are possibly seeking sponsorship in some way, shape, or form, just to hear, some of the things that you guys have gone through, and most importantly, how you've evolved. Now, you mentioned towards the beginning that when you started with the Shorty Awards, you were like, why is the press interested? What's going on? And how do I get the word out more? And all these types of things. Tell us, how did this idea for Muck come about, and give you, say, hey, the confirmation, if you will, that, yeah, this is something that the world needs?
Basically, what happened was we saw journalists were using social early on because of the Shorty Awards. Had it not been for that, we wouldn't have gotten that insight. And then we saw that there were all these journalists on social, but no way to find them all.
Mm.
So we originally, and this is, again, kind of goes to this idea of not planning too much, but we had this idea that, like, hey, we could build a website that just showed you all the journalists on social media and what they're sharing. And that was it. We were just like, hey, we can make it. We were sure we could build it in a week. Ended up taking 2 weeks, but we built it in 2 weeks. We knew how to build websites, so there were no really hard costs for us, except for that $8 domain name on GoDaddy. And then we figured, okay, let's build it and see what happens. It feels like something that'd be useful to just be able to see all these journalists on social, because right now there's no way to find them. So we built that, launched it, and then it became very popular with journalists. So we ran it for a couple of years just as a free resource site on the side of doing the Shorty Awards and trying out some other business ideas. And then we had over 10,000 journalists request to get listed on Muck. And then I kept talking to people who were in public relations. I'd run into people who worked at PR firms or did PR in-house, or scrappy entrepreneurs who were just really good at getting press for themselves. And they'd all tell me like, oh, I love using Muck. I use it all the time to figure out which journalists I should pitch on a story idea. And then it finally hit us like, oh, they're using it to figure out which journalists to pitch. And we didn't even build it for that. But what if we actually built a bunch of tools for that and charged for it? It's a subscription business model. And, having done the shorties, which is a ton of fun and it's good business, but it was always kind of boom or bust, where either you're like in the season, you make the revenue, you hope you can make enough revenue to cover the expenses, and then start over from ground one. And I really wanted to get into a business where it would be subscription product for the customers, because then we just knew, hey, if we just made a great product and gave us awesome customer service, then by default, the customer will renew and will want to renew. And then it can keep building on itself and have real cash flow to fund growth.
Now,
and that's what we did. We relaunched Muck and made it a SaaS platform.
So, okay. Now, for those who actually might be familiar and already familiar, or possibly have heard of other services, what would you say would be the biggest differentiator? Because this time, as opposed to inventing something new, i.e. going with the Shorty Awards, this time, though, you also have companies, or at least services that I've heard of, like Haro, Help a Reporter Out there. And now you're looking at a different landscape potentially when you go out there, and there could be confusion in the marketplace between the two. And how do you differentiate yourself and deal with those challenges?
Sure, yeah. So the big difference between Muck and Haro, and Haro, Help a Reporter Out, awesome service. I love it and recommend it. But the idea with Haro is a journalist goes there and they'll post on it and say, hey, I'm looking to cover, I'm looking to write about plant food. If you know a plant food expert, come pitch me. And that's great when it happens. But the problem is, probably 99% of articles, like, the journalist doesn't think to request the source on Haro. They either come up with the story idea on their own, they get pitched the story idea, maybe it's serendipity, they see something cool spreading on social, like in the case of the shorties. So, the idea was, like, beyond these services like Haro, where you wait for the journalist to explicitly request the source, how do you let a company be proactive about finding the right journalist to talk to about a story idea?
Okay.
And so our idea...
Oh, go ahead. I think you're about to answer my question.
Sure, yeah. So our idea was, let's index all the tweets all the journalists write and all the stories they write, and then make that searchable. So we run a search engine, kind of like Google, but it's all for finding the right journalist. And so the old way of doing things was that, you'd say, hey, I'm going to launch, let's say a new iPhone app. So I'm just going to look up which journalists write about tech and then, start pitching tech journalists. But in reality, a lot of those tech journalists, maybe they only cover enterprise software. So they're never going to write about your consumer iPhone app. So our big idea was, like, if we index everything they wrote, you could do super specific targeting of journalists based on what they've written about or tweeted about in past. You could go on there and say, hey, let's say I'm launching an iPhone app and it's similar to, it's a fitness tracking app. So if a journalist wrote about Map My Run, they'll probably write about my fitness tracking app. So you could go to Muck, search for all the journalists that have written about Map My Run. You could search for the journalists that are tweeting that they're using Map My Run. You could say, hey, I want to find the journalists that are writing about Map My Run and also talking about Under Armour, because I think if they've covered those two things, they'll probably want my thing. And then right through Muck, build that media list of all those really relevant journalists and actually customize and send emails to them, seeing if they want to write about you.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking, is that the company, when they wanted to take control, so to speak, or do their best to be, as you said, proactive in figuring out how to make that happen. Because, yeah, we could be, our service or product or whatever it is that we're bringing to the table could be something that's completely new, and we don't necessarily know who. We just know that somebody would like to know about this, or we would like more people to know about this. So talk to us a little bit about what's the best way for, say, an entrepreneur to be able to approach the journalist. I mean, we're going to use, Muck to figure out which ones that we need to talk to, but do you guys go so far as to help those of us who are seeking some of this PR to actually know what to say and how to make our pitch more effective?
Sure. Well, the number one thing for entrepreneurs to remember when they're pitching journalists is that the journalists are human beings. So, of course, you got to be really kind of personable and thoughtful in your outreach to them. You got to know they're busy, and also that they cover a beat, they have an audience, and every morning they're waking up and they have a big problem, which is, what do I write about? They got to find stuff to write about all the time. So if you send them a really relevant pitch, you're helping them. If you're not doing your research and you send them an irrelevant pitch, then you're making their lives more difficult, and they get a lot of junky pitches already. But having said all that, when you do pitch a journalist, you have to remember, as an entrepreneur, you actually have a big advantage, because the journalists are always getting pitched by PR pros, and it's great to use PR pros, you can afford it, but they're always getting pitched by people whose job it is to pitch them, and they generally love hearing from an entrepreneur because it shows the passion. They like hearing that you're putting yourself out there and you're pitching it because you believe in this great idea, and you're not just doing it because you're getting paid to do it. So you've got that going for you.
Right.
But then there are a few hurdles to overcome that a lot of entrepreneurs have trouble with. One is really thinking, like, is what you're doing news, and, is the aspect of it that you're telling the journalist news. So a lot of times, we get
well, hold on a second, Greg. It's news to me, though. You don't understand. This is a big deal in my life. How do we...
Exactly. You, your mother, your wife, the three friends you go drinking with, it's news to them.
How do you... Okay, so on that topic, though, how does one determine? I mean, because we have a strong, we'll say, bias towards our idea, our widget, our baby, if you will. How on earth can we even begin to determine because the journalist has a customer base that has thousands of people. How can we begin to determine that there thousands of other people are going to be interested? Now, we believe they should be, of course. That's why we made the product in the first place. That's why we're developing the service. That's why we're doing the cause, because we think everybody should be. But how do they make that determination?
Yeah, it requires a bit of picking up a nose for news. But, one thing I would suggest is try boiling. The biggest area I see entrepreneurs go wrong is, like, they write up why their thing's special, and it's, 10 paragraphs. You can't really understand what they're talking about. I've seen so many pitches from entrepreneurs where I look at the pitch and I'm like, I don't even know what you're pitching. So what I would suggest is try getting it down to like a tweet. I mean, don't tweet it, but see if you can describe what what's newsworthy about your company in one sentence. And then run that by some friends, run that by some, grab someone random at a coffee shop, someone who's not, you always have the people in your life who are going to say anything you do is awesome and it's so special because you're doing it. But run it by someone who's objective. and see, like, like, is there anything new about this? Is there some cool hook to what you're doing that makes it totally different? Are you the first one to open up a coffee shop in a neighborhood? That might be news. If you're the 10th coffee shop and it's just cool because you're doing it, that's probably not news, and that'll come out when you have to really boil it down. Or, is your coffee shop the only coffee shop that has, a cup of coffee with twice the caffeine as everyone else, or something that sounds cool? The hook, is there a hook to it?
Yeah.
So that's what you have to get. And I think just forcing yourself to write the headline, almost write it as that one sentence, and see, like, is there something really here, or am I just, am I just caught up in my own BS?
No, that would never happen. So, what I like, though, about your journey specifically is it's really clear to see how what you did prior informs what you do in the present. Because, starting with building a site, then taking that information and turning it into the Shorty Awards, and then taking that, what you learned there, and turning that into Muck, it only begs the question, how long before we see the next creation from Greg?
Oh, that's confidential. You have to follow me on Twitter to find that out. But,
that's also code for you have an idea, don't you? I know you do.
Well, I'll tell you, I have dozens of ideas, but right now I'm in a mode of really focusing and executing on these two that work, Muck and the Shorties. And within them, there's a million things we're doing. We're launching new features all the time within Muck and finding out various ways to extend the Shorties and better serve our audience. But the thing that I've learned is that you have to be able to switch between modes. So you have to, at some point in a startup, be in an exploratory mode, which we were in when we came up with the Shorties and Muck. And, we launched over 10 other ideas during that time. Also, we were building them in a week or two, seeing that they'd stick, and we killed a lot of stuff that didn't work. So, there's sometimes when you have to be in the exploratory mode and you don't yet have something. So you're like, let's put a bunch of stuff out to the world and see what works. Think about, like, when a network wants to develop a new sitcom, like, they don't just have the idea for Seinfeld. They piloted 10 shows, and one of them was Seinfeld, and 9 of them never connected with an audience or went anywhere. So there was that exploratory mode that we were in. And, by nature, I love launching stuff. It's hard for me to switch modes because I just love launching stuff.
Right.
But then I saw, like, hey, we've got these two things. They work. They have an audience. But if we're really going to take them to the next level, it's going to take focus. We need priorities. We need to build a team. We need to have a lot of consistency. So that's the mode I've been in for the past several years, is just total focus on these two businesses. And then each one has a dedicated team that's 100% focused on them. And that's what really made it work and scale. So, right now I'm in the focus and scale mode. But, I love coming up with ideas and talking about them over drinks. And then one day, who knows, maybe I'll start making some of them happen.
Oh, I can hear it in your voice. It's already brewing, but that's good. We'll save that for another time. For those, though, that have listened this far and, want to find out more about what you're up to and what you might be up to in the future, what's going to be the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so check out Muckrack, just muckrack.com, muckrack.com, or shortyawards.com, shortyawards.com. And for me personally, as I said, I'm just at Gregory, Gregory, on both Twitter and Instagram. So you can follow me on either of those and hear what I'm up to, or, just tweet at me at Gregory, and happy to answer any questions.
Got it. Now, as we wind down, I've got a final question for you because I'm kind of curious to hear your answer. Let's pretend that someone listening is they reach what I like to call the precipice of decision, Greg. They're now at that point. They've listened this far and they go, you know what? If Greg can do this with no planning, so can I. I'm going to make something happen because it's done. My idea, my time is right now. I'm going to go and get it done. Now, like I know, Greg, that when we reach these moments of decisions, we often have a companion, and that companion comes in the form of a voice, and it's a voice that reminds us, oh, you're going to do what? Oh, I don't think anyone's going to care about your awards. You're going to get PR. No one's going to care about your story. And it reminds us of all the things that didn't work. And for some people, they're actually related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend that this time it's going to be different. They're actually going to follow through, and they're going to follow through in the next 24 to 48 hours. Greg, they're going to do exactly what you say. So my question to you is as follows. What should they do?
I'd really think through the worst case scenario. So if you've got a business idea like ours where it's, hey, let's put up a website that we know, the costs are going to be very limited. In this case, it was mostly our time and $10 for domain name. And I mean, in truth, maybe we spent a couple $100 on hosting and other stuff, but it wasn't thousands or tens of thousands of dollars just to try it. Then, think through the worst case. Like, let's say you spend 2 weeks of your life. Let's even say you spend, $5,000 trying this idea. If you have, as long as you have some savings, which hopefully you do by that time, or, you have some source of income, then, think through like, okay, if it doesn't work, is it that I'm a failure in life, or that I just tried an experiment? I kind of bet the $5,000 in the 2 weeks of my life, and it didn't work. And if you think through and you think, hey, the worst case scenario isn't that bad, then you can listen to that voice, and you can even say you might be right to it, but I'm going to try it anyhow because I got nothing to lose, or I can at least bear the loss, and there's a good chance that there's a really good upside to it.
Yeah, totally get that. Totally get that 100%. And I definitely appreciate just the way that you attack problems, the way that you carry what the positive things that you've learned from the past into the future. And yet at the same time, you're creating opportunities where none existed before, because there will be individuals who are listening to you and using services like Muck to be able to get the word out. And that's enabling others to be the change agents that we desire to be is, I think, a noble cause. For sure. And I definitely want to be the first to thank you for taking your time to share your knowledge, your wisdom, and your insight here with us today at the Cashflow Diary.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, Jay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means get over to muckrack.com. Get over to the shortyawards.com. Why? Because you were inspired. You're like, he spent how much time in planning? He did what? And yeah, it can happen like that. But go listen to the marketplace. You can hear how his decisions are informed by feedback. And you must, when building your cash flow, listen to your customer. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.